Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend, the Mama Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is this series of What If Deku the Hero's Return. Izuku was practically buzzing with excitement as he settled into his desk at Aldera High 15 minutes before the bell. The stiff plastic seat and flimsy desk in front of him felt nostalgic, even if it was a tight squeeze. He had his pencils lined up, books stacked high, and his notebook open to his latest entries. As he read through his own notes, he felt bewildered by unfamiliar mathematical equations and historical dates from a timeline his mind had twisted into knots. Faced with the prospect of brushing up after 2 years away from a textbook, Izuku grinned and set himself to reading from the start. His eyes flicked across the pages, and his fingernails swept each page as he finished it. Within minutes, he set aside mathematics and dug into his language book. Izuku stopped when he heard the door open. He glanced over and saw Bakugo swagger in. A radiant euphoria filled him as he basked in yet another piece of home he had missed these past 2 years. "Oh, hey Kaken, great to see you." Bakugo's jaw twitched, and his hands let out a pop. "Shove off, Deku. Some of us have UA entrance exams to prepare for." Izuku felt the tiniest murmur of fear in his chest. Perplexed, Izuku ignored it and kept smiling. "Yeah, you tell him, Bakugo," another kid said. Izuku shrugged and went back to his notes. As he read, he heard one student whisper, "Is it me, or does Deku look different? I think he dyed his hair." As if maybe someone would think he had a quirk, they added with a snicker, "It's not just the hair. His skin looks darker too. Probably just the hair. He tried to bleach it, and it didn't take. Idiot." The conversation ended when the teacher strode in. "All right, class," he said. "Today we're going to review your career choice submissions." He paused for a beat, then added, "Is what I would say if you hadn't all picked heroics." The class erupted into raucous cheers and displays of quirks. The teacher had to shout a few times before he got them all to settle down. Yes, it's all very exciting. However, it's important that you at least consider a backup option." Bakugo snorted. "Speak for the extras. I'm getting into UA." "Of course," the teacher excitedly agreed. "And it looks like we have one other aiming to get into UA." The teacher gave a meaningful glance at Izuku. The students around him giggled, and one said, "Really, Deku? Do you think you even have a chance of getting in?" "HM?" Izuku looked up from his book. "Oh, UA? I already got accepted." Dead silence fell over the class. The teacher gaped at him, unsure what to make of his claim. "Now, Midoriya, you really shouldn't lie like that." "I'm not," Izuku asked. "If you're confused, you could always call Principal Nezu. Probably got a pity invite to their general course," a student drawled. The comment got multiple snickers. "Nah, I'm in the hero course. I even met my homeroom teacher." Bakugo slammed his hands on his desk, splintering the cheap plastic with a deafening explosion. "Deku," he roared. "The fuck did you just say? Are you mocking me?" Izuku felt a powerful urge to shrink into his seat, to cower and cringe before Bakugo. The part of him seasoned with the salt and sea spray of another world examined the puppy yapping at him and found him wanting. Izuku gave him a sly smile, pushing through his warring emotions. "What? Mad you're only going to be the second person from this school to get into UA?" The whole class stared at him in open-mouthed shock. The people nearest him slowly edged away, warily watching Bakugo. The teacher looked torn between admonishing him, calming down Bakugo, or sprinting out the door. Bakugo stepped back, his expression flitting between confusion and fury. His face turned scarlet, his teeth ground noisily together, and beads of nitroglycerin snapped in his hands. "Oh, you're dead, Deku. They'll never find the body." "They will if they look at UA." Bakugo trembled with rage, looking as though his entire body would explode at any second. The smell of burnt sugar filled the room, and every pair of eyes darted towards the nearest exit. But Izuku sat in his seat, calmly smiling back at Bakugo, simply glad he got to talk to his best friend again after all these years. "Bakugo, please sit down," the teacher begged. "It's time to review the course material for the entrance exams." Bakugo glared at the teacher, and the man flinched. Yet, the magic words entrance exam worked their wonders on Bakugo. He let out a long, frustrated growl, rubbed the sweat off his hands, and grumpily threw himself into his seat. Izuku, still needing to take UA's academic exam, absorbed every word of the teacher's lecture like a wrung-out sponge. Between that and rapidly flipping through his textbooks, he found himself far less lost by the time the bell rang for lunch. When other students brought out platters of rice, meat, and vegetables for the whole class, Izuku, oblivious to their protests, helped himself to 10 servings of each. His tower of food wobbled precariously as he nimbly stepped around students and tables until he claimed his seat in the far corner of the room. As he shoved entire trays into his mouth, his voracious eating habits drew stares and whispers from across the cafeteria. Within minutes, people had abandoned their lunches entirely to watch Izuku wolf down yet another bowl of rice. One student among them walked towards Izuku's table. He approached with a malicious grin, hand outstretched to knock over Izuku's pile of platters. The quiet muttering turned into excited titters and muffled giggles as the school eagerly awaited the toppling of Izuku's food tower. The moment the student's hand came within an inch of Izuku's food, Izuku jabbed his chopsticks into the table. The sharp thwack sound it made cut the mocking laughter like a knife, leaving its fading echoes dead in the air. As for the prankster, he stared in horror at the bamboo sticks, perfectly intact, driven straight through the table. Had his fingers been any closer, his nails would have gotten trimmed. Izuku, now missing his chopsticks, simply scooped more food into his mouth with his hands. No one saw fit to laugh at him. Midway through the last round of review, a call came over the intercom for Izuku. The class jeered as Izuku gathered his books and went off to the principal's office. He got lost for a few minutes, not quite remembering which way to go, until a sign got him back on track. After a knock on the door, the principal told him to come in. When Izuku grabbed the doorknob, he felt a spike of fear. Memories of other visits to the principal's office flashed by him. The principal had told him that he was worthless, that he should stop getting in the way of their best student, that no one would care if he complained to anyone else. Being told he was imagining things when his tests were marked incorrectly, being blamed when students stole his books or flung his food across the cafeteria. "Are you coming in or not?" the principal snapped. Izuku jerked away from the door. A static shock jumped from his fingertips to the metal knob. He clenched a fist and watched lightning dance across his arm. "Sorry. Excuse me." Izuku closed the door behind him and took a seat in the old, uncomfortable chair in front of the principal's desk. The principal gave him a stern look and said, "It has come to my attention that you have attacked a fellow student, vandalized school property, and stole extra helpings from the cafeteria staff." "Really? When did that happen?" "At lunch. Multiple witnesses reported that you stabbed at another student with chopsticks when they went to sit down in front of you with enough force to puncture the table." Izuku suddenly remembered the 2 chopsticks sticking out of the table when he went to return his empty trays. "Oh, oops. Force of habit. Do you need me to pay for the table?" The principal's eyebrow twitched. "The table isn't the issue here. The issue is the student you assaulted." "Assaulted? Did I hurt them? I didn't see any blood." "Well, no, but—" "So what's the problem?" The principal slammed their palms on their desk. "The problem is, Midoriya, that you have caused your classmates significant distress by threatening them with bodily harm. And we do not tolerate that kind of behavior in this school." Izuku tilted his head. "Bakugo and everyone else threaten me with bodily harm all the time, and no one's ever had a problem with that. Enough of this. The principal roared. I will not hear any words besmirching this school's finest student. You have caused problems ever since your enrollment here. You've disrupted class, harassed fellow students, and quite frankly, your condition leaves you absolutely useless to society. You're lucky we've tolerated you as long as we have. With this incident, however, it's clear to me there is no hope of correcting your behavior. Izuku Midoriya, for assaulting a classmate and damaging school property, you are hereby. A frantic knock came from the door. The principal froze, mid-tirade. Izuku let out the breath he had been holding, and realized he had clenched his fists hard enough to crack the wooden frame of the chair he sat in. He felt guilty for a second, before he realized the principal was going to expel him anyway. What was a broken chair on top of that? Sir, there's something Izuku's teacher went pale seeing him in the other seat. Yes, what is it? The principal asked irritably. I was just about to. I need to talk to you. Privately. The principal leveled a glare at Izuku. Wait right outside the door. And don't try to listen in. You're in enough trouble already. Izuku pressed his ear to the door. If the last 2 years had taught him anything, it was if you were already in trouble, you might as well start punching Marines. They'd shoot at you either way. Earlier in class, the teacher said. Izuku said that he was already accepted into UA. And that's another reason I get to add to his expulsion form. Excellent. So I called them up. And it turns out he's telling the truth. What? The bravado blew out of the principal like a popped balloon. He got accepted yesterday after, I quote, he teleported a car half a mile into the air, flew down, pulled someone out of the way of an 18-wheeler, stopped the 18-wheeler as it went off the road, then caught the car. Apparently UA has a vigilante rehabilitation program for minors performing illegal heroic deeds. The principal sputtered. There's no way that's real. A video of it went viral. I still have it on my phone. Curious, Izuku took out his own phone and looked it up. He felt mildly horrified it had already crossed 1 million views. So, the teacher said, you mentioned something about an expulsion form. For Midoriya? The principal let out a long sigh. Great job following up on this. I don't even want to think about what would happen if Yua heard we expelled him. I trust you have it handled. Yes, just pretend nothing happened. The year's almost over anyways. Izuku backed away from the door when he heard the teacher walking out. The teacher gave him a nod, said, nice catch, and went back to class. As Izuku took the seat again, the principal had a forced smile on his face. Terribly sorry about the wait. So, about the whole lunchtime incident, I've decided to let you off with a warning. Kids will be kids sometimes, and as long as you don't do it again, we can keep it off your record. Izuku felt fury simmering inside of him. The principal had spent years treating him like trash and calling him worthless, only to immediately change his tune. The moment he heard Izuku had gotten into UA, he thought about how he could tear the school apart with his bare hands. Leap up and rain lightning down until only a scorched crater remained. Or he could figuratively tear the school apart with a single phone call to Nezu. UA had strict policies against harassment, after all. But then, if the school was investigated, what would happen to Kaken? If word got out about what he did, he would never make it into UA. Then again, did Izuku care? Really? Izuku asked blandly. It sounded a lot like you were about to expel me. The principal gulped. Well, perhaps I could have worded my intentions better. Obviously, I wouldn't expel a student so close to the end of the year. Why not? As you said earlier, I've been causing problems since my enrollment. Izuku leaned forward, and the principal shrank in his chair. You said that there's no hope of correcting my behavior. Izuku stood, towering over the principal. And, what was it? That my condition makes me useless. But you're not quirkless anymore, I saw it. You're right. I'm not quirkless anymore. Izuku reached for the electricity powering the light bulb and yanked it out of the circuit. The bulb exploded in a shower of glass. Crackling lightning flowed from the exposed socket and coalesced around Izuku's hands. So this makes it okay for me to attack other people and tell them they're worthless, right? What about you, then? What's stopping me from smashing your face into your desk until one of them breaks? The principal froze in terror. He tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. Izuku squeezed his fist, dissipating the electricity in a green flash. You want to know what's funny? As the silence drew on, Izuku's gaze bored deep into the principal. Shivering, the man croaked. Double what? Everything you saw in that video? I did all of that without using my quirk. To prove his point, Izuku grabbed the edge of the desk and lifted it. The cables connected to the principal's computer went taut, pulling the computer across the desk until it tipped sideways. Izuku hoisted his desk over his head until he could stare directly at the principal with the desk overhead. No one is worthless, Izuku said. I thought I was, once. But I worked hard to get this strong. Quirk or no quirk, I will become the #1 hero. Izuku set the desk down. The principal winced as the base of it narrowly missed his feet. The more I remember of this place, the more disgusted I am that I ever wanted to come back here. The principal nervously adjusted his tie and tried to smile. Double, what do you want? I could have your grades adjusted, or clean up your record. You wouldn't want UA seeing all those negative comments about you, right? I'll have everything fixed by tomorrow. Don't bother. I doubt Nezu cares about anything you would have to say. Then what do you want? Izuku imagined seeing the principal dragged out in handcuffs, or staring in shock at a school demolished by lightning. But in all those imaginings, Izuku felt a sense of apathy. Why would he even bother ruining this man's life? The man cowering before him was so far beneath him that Izuku felt no joy in defeating him. You have nothing that I want. Goodbye, principal. I won't be coming back. Leaving behind a bewildered principal, Izuku felt as though a weight had left his shoulders. By the time he made it back to class to get his books, the school day had ended, and Izuku left with everyone else. It wasn't until the crowd of students had thinned out and Izuku entered a quiet stretch of road that he heard a familiar shout behind him. Deku, Bakugo roared. Don't think I forgot what you said this morning. The two students flanking him grinned and cracked their knuckles. What did I say this morning? Asked Izuku, who had genuinely forgotten. Bakugo's face went beet red. That's it. You're in for it now. Get him. Tsubasa flapped his wings and charged at him. Izuku leaned aside, letting Tsubasa trip himself on his leg. While he tumbled over, the next student grabbed Izuku's shirt. He yanked, and he nearly fell over when Izuku refused to budge. What the hell? Bakugo lit sparks in his hands. Are you two seriously getting pushed around by Deku? Something's not right, Bakugo, the student tugging Izuku's shirt said. We should go. Go? Tsubasa roared. He's just standing there. Are you really afraid of some wimp? Tsubasa charged from behind. He plowed into Izuku's back, trying to sweep him off his feet. Izuku's shoes never budged. What the heck? How is he not moving? Step aside, you idiots. I got this. Bakugo sauntered up, looked Izuku in the eye, and threw a punch. Izuku let it land on his cheek. Bakugo hissed in pain and cradled his wrist, backed away and gave Izuku a confused look. Is that it? Izuku asked. He didn't even seem to breathe for all he looked like a statue, tall and immovable before the boys pushing and hitting him. Bakugo roared and threw his other fist. It collided with Izuku's nose. Bakugo's middle finger audibly popped as Izuku's nose bent it back into his palm. With another roar, Bakugo flung an open palm. The explosion engulfed Izuku's head, but as the smoke cleared, not a mark lingered on Izuku's skin. Even his hair had escaped unscathed. Bakugo flung explosion after explosion, each one bigger than the last, until Bakugo gasped for breath and his palms were burned raw from all the detonated nitroglycerin. As the echoes of the explosions faded, Izuku spoke into the silence. For the longest time, I thought we were still friends. Now that I have real friends, friends who care about me and stand by my side, no matter what, just like how I stood with them, I know you're not one of them, and you haven't been for a long time. Izuku grabbed the two students still clinging to him by their shirt collars and gently pried them off him. They shivered at the easy way that Izuku manhandled them both. "We're done, Bakugo." Izuku turned and walked away. Bakugo stood dumbstruck for a moment, before his features twisted into a scowl. "Deku, don't you walk away from me." Izuku left Bakugo's shouts behind him as he walked home. His path meandered down alleys and abandoned streets as he wondered why everything was so different from what he remembered. He thought that Bakugo still cared, in his own way, trying to toughen him up. He even thought the school was right about him being worthless. How had he ever lived like this? How had he stood it, all these years, covering up burns and bruises and accepting blame for whatever the principal and teachers accused him of, just so his mom wouldn't worry? And why did it sting so much, leaving cake and leaving Bakugo behind like that? He felt like a foot 10 sizes too large for an old shoe. He no longer fit in the life of Izuku Midoriya. His bed was too small. The All Might posters and paraphernalia lining his walls seemed too creepy. And Inko's meals left his stomach yearning for more. He had finally made it back, only to realize that maybe he should have stayed in the other world after all. At least there, he belonged. Lost in his thoughts as he was, he never heard the sewer grate pop. He never heard the slime villain rush towards him. But as the villain lunged, Izuku spun and threw a roundhouse punch. Izuku's haki-coated fist buried itself in the villain's face and splattered him against the wall of the underpass. Izuku panted and clenched his fist until his fingernails dug into his palm. He itched to keep punching, to thrash the villain that had jumped him until every inch of the street was smeared with the villain's gelatinous body. But the rational part of his brain frantically put the brakes on the prospective vigilantism and manslaughter. With an irritated huff, Izuku kept walking and looked for something to punch. When he saw the giant trash heap cluttering Dagaba Beach, Izuku knew he found his punching bag. Refrigerators, rusted cars, appliances, heaps of abandoned lumber, and warped steel beams, everything went flying, imprinted with Izuku's fist and feet, as he tore through the garbage piles of the beach. Once Izuku finally ran out of steam, he wiped the sweat off his brow and looked around. Before, the beach had some semblance of order, with the trash sectioned off into piles. Now, the trash was scattered along Izuku's wake. Torn plastic and paper bobbed in the waves, and jagged splinters of metal and wood jutted from the trash-strewn sand like spears. Izuku grimaced at the mess. The beach hadn't been cleaned by any standard, but this mess spilled out onto the streets and the ocean. Someone could get hurt if no one cleaned it up. With that thought in mind, Izuku scanned the area. The trash and the waves made grabbing them risky, but with bursts of Jeppo, Izuku darted over the sea, scooping trash into his arms and dumping them into nearby garbage dumpsters. Izuku tackled the heavier items next, lugging entire cars to a nearby lot and dumping the appliances in any bin that could hold him. For the lighter items, he had to range increasingly farther away for empty dumpsters. But with Soru, Izuku flashed from beach to dumpster, hauling entire armloads of garbage bags and wadded plastic in the blink of an eye. The sun still shone over the rooftops as Izuku combed the beach for any last debris. He sprinted so quickly the sand churned in his wake, then doubled back and plucked any bit of metal or wood that caught his eye. After a couple passes, Izuku checked his work. The beach had a distinctive wind-blasted look, with eddies of sand sweeping onto sidewalks and odd trenches where Izuku had sprinted through. But the sand itself had a toasted almond color that glowed in the waning sunlight. and the ocean waves glittered as they lapped against the shore. Izuku's stomach loudly reminded him that he was really late getting home. With another burst of speed, Izuku flitted through the light pedestrian traffic, leapt straight up the apartment stairs, and opened the door so quickly he nearly tore out the hinges. "Sorry I'm late," Izuku said. "Also, I'm not going back to Aldra anymore." "What?" Inko looked horrified. "Did something happen?" Izuku shrugged. "I should have left that place years ago." "Doesn't matter, with Yua already accepting me, and the principal agreed to it." It occurred to Izuku that he had left before the principal could say anything. However, he had a feeling the men wouldn't correct him. "Oh, all right then. Dinner's a bit cold, so I'll warm some up for you." Izuku resigned himself to another night with a tight belt as he scraped every grain of rice off his plate. When he went to leave, Inko brought over a second plate, piled high with more beef teriyaki. "You're still hungry, aren't you?" Inko asked. She looked nervous as she pushed the food towards him. "I noticed you eating more than normal this morning, and it seemed like you expected more last night." Holding back tears, Izuku took the second plate. He rapidly shoveled the food in while Inko heated up a third helping. As Izuku wolfed down round after round, he thanked his mom for giving himself at least one place that he still fit. After washing all the dishes, taking care not to let his hands dip too deeply into the sink, he cracked open his textbooks. Maybe Aldra no longer fit him, but Yua was a new start, where only the greatest students came to learn. If anywhere else in his world still fit him, he would find it there. Izuku could feel Katsuki's eyes boring holes into the back of his head, but he resolutely ignored his former friend in favor of studying the presence lurking underneath the desk. He had noticed the yellow lump on the floor walking in, but after finding no answers about it, shelved that discovery in favor of processing the fact he would spend yet another year in class with Katsuki. Izuku shrugged and thought to himself that he could always walk out of this school too. He heard good things about Shiksu. The presence in the sleeping bag decided to make itself known by silently standing and chastising the chattering class with a judgmental look. Izuku had his notebook out and pen at the ready, but his classmates took significantly longer to notice that their teacher had arrived. "That was some pathetic situational awareness," Aizawa told them. "Not only did most of you fail to notice me as you walked in, it took you all half a minute to notice me once class started." Aizawa set a large sack of gym clothes on his desk. "Pick something out that's your size, get dressed, and meet me outside." "But sir," Ida said, hand raised, "aren't we supposed to? This school has 3 years to mold you into professional heroes. I'm not wasting a second of it." With that said, Aizawa vaulted out a window. While a few classmates watched him run off, Izuku snatched a shirt and shorts from the sack and ran for the locker room. Sensing his urgency, the rest of the class scrambled after him. Izuku already had his shirt peeled off when Bakugo came to a screeching halt at the door. "Deku, what the fuck is that?" Izuku ignored him and started putting on his shirt. Bakugo grabbed the fabric, and Izuku grabbed his wrist hard enough to make Bakugo hiss through his teeth. "I told you we were done." Breathing shallowly, Bakugo said, "Your shoulder, that scar." Izuku eased his grip. He twisted around until he saw what Bakugo meant. "Oh, that. Got that from Whitebeard." "Who's Whitebeard?" Izuku blinked and looked past Bakugo. His scar had drawn a sizable audience from the guys streaming into the men's locker room. Plenty gawked at the long white streak running from shoulder to shoulder, and a few even looked sick. One of the 4 emperors of the sea. Few pirates can compare to him. "Wait, pirates? Are you saying you met pirates?" Kirishima asked. "Yeah, went sailing with some for a few years." Izuku snapped the shirt out of Bakugo's grasp and shoved it on. "Come on, teacher's waiting." Using Soru, Izuku made it well before anyone else. Aizawa checked his watch and said, 6 minutes. I expected better. Sorry, sir. They got curious about the scar. Before Aizawa could ask what that meant, Bakugo sprinted up, huffing and glaring daggers at Izuku. The rest of the guys jogged together a minute later, followed by a walking cluster of girls. That was 12 minutes, Aizawa said dryly. More than enough time for a villain to rob a store, kill a few people, and disappear. But at least you'll be right on time to explain yourselves to the media. Do better next time. While most of the class grumbled sourly over the teacher's words, Ida asked, "Why did you have all of us come out here?" Physical assessment. Aizawa tossed a baseball to Bakugo. Up to this point, schools prohibited you from using your quirk on the physicals. It's illogical and hampers your growth, and that ends today. Bakugo grinned feral, stepped into the ring, and rocketed the baseball with a loud explosion. 700 meters later, Aizawa showed the results. This is your starting point. All your growth here at UA will be measured against your performance today. Izuku felt the excitement of the students around him, and he couldn't help but feel an electric thrill run through him as well. A spark danced across his skin as he savored the prospect of seeing how much he had grown. "Ooh, this sounds so much fun," Mina said. Aizawa gave them all a chilling look, silently judging them all for how eager they appeared. "Fun? Do you really want to treat this like a game?" Mina's smile vanished. "Well, no, Games have to have stakes, don't they? Well, guess what? Whoever has the lowest score across all 7 exams is expelled." That sucked the rest of the cheer from his classmates, but Izuku's smile stayed on his face. If anything, he felt more determined. A part of him felt guilty that someone would go home today, but he had a promise to keep, and nothing would stop him from giving it anything less than his best. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Bakugo had a grin mirroring his own. For the first test, Izuku crouched next to Ida at the starting line. The moment Aizawa snapped his fingers, Izuku took off with Soru. The clock at the far end flashed under a second for his score. Tsuyu leapt across the pit of sand in a single bound. Izuku jumped back and forth, never touching the ground, until Aizawa gave him an infinite score. Shoji made the grip test groan as the metal bent slightly under his tentacled grip. Izuku shattered it with a single flex of his hand. After the side hop test, Minta dizzily raised 2 purple orbs high over his head and shouted, "Yes, bow before me, puny mortals, for I have beaten Izuku Midoriya." "By 2 hops, Jiru said sourly. "Still won. You've been dead last in every other category. But I still won, woohoo." For the baseball toss, Ochako tapped her ball and chucked it into outer space. Once the infinite sign flashed up, she pumped her fist and said to Izuku, "Think you can beat that?" Izuku was contemplating just throwing it, but her challenge made him rethink the exercise. He could try hitting it with lighting, but that would probably destroy the baseball. If it was metal, he could do a railgun, but it wasn't, and he didn't have a way to cover it in metal. Or did he? "Momo, right?" Izuku asked. "Mind making an iron shell for this baseball?" Most of the class silently pleaded that she would refuse. She gave Aizawa a questioning look, but the teacher didn't say a word. I suppose the rules said nothing about getting outside help. Minta, Kaminari, Mina, and Siro all groaned. Ignoring them, Momo made 2 interlocking halves of metal that Izuku twisted over his ball. "All right? You might want to stand back and cover your ears." Izuku tested the heft by letting the ball levitate between his palms. Momo, realizing exactly what Izuku was about to do, hurriedly pumped out enough ear protection for the rest of the class. Jiru lunged for hers like a lifeline, while Bakugo scoffed and crossed his arms. Izuku's first impulse was to aim at a 45-degree angle, but instinct made him raise his arms nearly vertical. They outstretched and flattened, forming the twin rails of his impromptu railgun. Izuku kicked up the baseball with his foot, flooded his arms with electricity, and fired. The recoil slammed Izuku into the ground. The deafening roar of a powerful shockwave rang out across the school, ruffling clothing and rattling the windows. Overhead, a cloud blew apart into a cumulus ring, and wisps of vapor marked the baseball's trail into outer space. Izuku dug himself out from the crater he had made hitting the ground and dusted himself off. So, how did I do? Aizawa held up a board announcing a big fat 0. You failed to stay within the circle, he said. Izuku looked down. A massive rut gouged out most of the circle, but enough remained to show that Izuku had slid far outside of it. Izuku sheepishly scratched his hair and said, "Whoops. Any chance I get a do-over?" "You have no need of one, and what you would have scored will be your benchmark." Even with a 0 in the ball toss, Izuku had topped the class. Relieved sighs and shouts of joy echoed among the class as Aizawa worked his way down to the bottom. Once he got to last place, Minta shouted, "That can't be right. I beat Izuku on the side hop." "And yet," Aizawa said, "your performance was abysmal enough to drag you to the bottom. Even Hagakure and Koda, whose quirks offered no assistance at all on these challenges, fared better than you. If you wish to remain in the hero course, you have a lot of catching up to do." Minta froze mid-sniffle. "You mean, I'm not expelled?" "It was a logical ruse to encourage you all to work harder. I won't expel students for starting behind the rest." He leveled a glare at Minta and the others near the bottom and said, "That said, I will expel students who fail to improve themselves." His gaze swept towards the top-ranking students and added, "That includes those of you who started out stronger. Don't slack off." At lunch, Izuku brought a Minta-sized pile of fried pork and rice over to an empty table. As he ate, he swiped food off a nearby plate. "Dude, you have a plate stacked that high and you're still going after my food." The outraged shout made Izuku look up. He glanced over Izuku's pile and saw Kirishima smirking, pointing at the half of fish still left on his plate. Izuku glanced at the pilfered food halfway into his mouth. "Oops. You can have some of mine if you want." As Kirishima helped himself to some pork, he asked, "That whole pirate thing, that was a joke, right?" "A joke? What do you mean?" "Well, pirates. Those aren't even around anymore, dude." Izuku cursed at himself. Bakugo's shock at seeing his scar caught him so off guard, he had revealed more than he should have. Yet, as he saw Kirishima's incredulous expression, he realized that no one would ever believe the truth. Not in this dimension, they're not. Went to another universe, sailed with the most feared pirate in their world for a year, learned mystical martial arts techniques from his first mate, ate a fruit that gave me superpowers, and came back home in time for dinner. As his story went on, he drew more of an audience from the surrounding tables. Kaminari, Siro, and Mina all snickered with each new ludicrous detail, while Todoroki and Takoyami both nodded impassively. Izuku privately worried that they might actually believe him. "So, you're a wanted criminal in another world?" Minta asked. "How can you be a hero then? Their police shoot unarmed civilians and burn whole islands to the ground. The real heroes of that world fly Jolly Rogers." Izuku's lunch devolved into a cue and a session as his classmates nitpicked his story. Izuku sweated as he dodged details about time travel and avoided explaining how he got back home. As lunch drew to an end, Izuku's rumbling stomach reminded him he had barely eaten, and with a mental sigh, he shoveled as much food down the hatch as he could. He lagged a bit behind as everyone returned to class. Momo waited up for him with an extra protein bar in hand. "Does your quirk consume a lot of food too?" she asked. Izuku shrugged. "No idea. It's that, or the crazy amount of exercise I do." He munched on the bar and noticed it felt greasier than usual. "Does yours require a high amount of fat?" Momo blinked. "How could you tell?" Izuku waved the bar. High-fat content. I was wondering about the matter source earlier. Makes sense, since fat has a higher calorie content per gram. By the end of the day, Izuku walked home with a spring in his step. One day in, and he had learned so much, made loads of new friends, came in first place for the assessment, and got elected as class president. Not even the bitter reminder that he had Bakugo for a classmate could bring his mood down. The next day made him even more excited. Combat training. After months of idling around and cramming years of forgotten school subjects into his brain, his fingers itched to punch out some teeth. He eagerly awaited the fights as he and everyone else drew straws. He found his partner, Ochako, and grinned when he got Katsuki as an opponent. How perfect, Izuku thought, that he could properly show his former friend how far he had come. All Might cleared his throat. Now that we have that settled, why don't we start with? The intercom crackled to life. Pardon me, All Might, Nezu said. I typically don't interfere in how teachers run their classes, and I would ordinarily have no objections to how you've randomly assigned partners. However, one student requires extra consideration. All Might blushed a bit. It'll be good for the students to experience, which is why we'll be changing the lineup a bit. Todoroki can work by himself, and put Shoji with Ochako. Midoriya will be facing a team I've made for him. The class muttered excitedly about the arrangements, and a few glared daggers at Izuku. Izuku himself had mixed feelings. On one hand, he wanted to see what his classmates could do. On the other, he liked the sound of an extra challenge. Halfway through the first fight, Izuku realized why Nezu had broken him off. His fellow students fought clumsily, throwing their quirks around with reckless abandon, blocking each other's attacks, or lagging behind as their stamina wore out. A few classmates stood out ahead of the rest. Ojiro, with good fighting form, Todoroki and the sheer power that froze an entire building, and Bakugo's explosive performance and sharp instincts. None of them could hold a candle to Zoro or Sanji. Heck, most of them couldn't even beat Usopp. When Izuku's turn came up, he tucked the offered earpiece into his ear and sauntered over to the building. As he approached the doors, Nezu's voice crackled in his ear. Your objective is slightly different. Unlike the others, simply touching the device won't be enough to win. One of your opponents has a detonation remote on their person, which they will set off if you approach the bomb or take down one of their teammates. Your mission is to subdue every villain and prevent them from detonating the bomb. How many villains are in there? Unknown. You'll be walking into this one blind. Good luck, Midoriya, and try not to kill them. Izuku took a deep breath and forced the lightning buzzing in his chest to calm a bit. Reasonably sure he wouldn't commit any manslaughter today, Izuku pressed both hands on the doors and shoved them open. He came face to face with a writhing wall of octopus tentacles. One snagged around his ankle. He tried to slip away, but the tentacles' grip tightened. Izuku felt plastic wrap clinging to his skin. He's pinned, his opponent called out. Izuku felt a twinge of danger. He bent sideways, folding himself in half as a twisted beam of light passed by his torso. Izuku flinched, and his heart hammered in his chest. But he quickly realized the light was the wrong color and Kizaru had no way of getting to his world. Izuku readied a thunderbolt, but his observation haki went off again. The lightning in his hand fizzled out, and instead, Izuku whirled around and kicked the air behind him. His foot passed through the grinning face that popped out of the ground. Good instincts, Mirio said. He ducked through the ground and popped up by his teammates. But you're going to have to do better than that. Mirio. Nejire crossed her arms and scowled at him. We're supposed to be villains. Get into character. Whoops, my bad, puny hero. Prepare to face the wrath of the greatest villains UA has ever created. You will never defeat us and disarm the bomb before time runs out. As Mirio and Nejire both let out cartoonishly evil laughs, Tamaki sighed and hid his face in his tentacle arm. Can I please go back to bed now? There's too many people watching us. Awa, Tamaki. But our cute little Kuhai is counting on us to show him a proper Yua welcome. Fine. He handed Mirio a set of rubber knuckle dusters that he slipped on. Hero, get ready to lose, or something. Izuku cast his senses around, but he could only sense the three in front of him. A tank, with rubbery tentacles and chitinous armor protecting him, a ranged fighter with light beams, and a rogue with a permeation quirk. Logically, the ranged fighter would have the detonator, but they could just as easily have given it to Tamaki knowing he'd think that. He could rule out Mirio. If his quirk allowed him to take objects with him, Tamaki wouldn't have needed to give him a weapon. On paper, this was a bad matchup for him. An enclosed space, surrounded by insulative material, with opponents properly armed and well coordinated. He also couldn't take them out individually since the moment one went down, the others would trigger the bomb. Izuku gave his best all-might laugh and said, "It's unfortunate for you that I showed up today. Looks like your explosive entry into villainy is a dud." Mirio cackled. That was an awesome cheesy one-liner. But let's see if you can back it up. Mirio's legs sank into the ground. Then he sprang forward. Izuku dodged the rubber knuckles and kicked through his arm. Taking advantage of his distraction, Nejier fired another curling beam. Izuku braced himself and took the hit head-on. Once he blinked the stars out of his eyes, Izuku saw Tamaki's tentacles reaching for him. Izuku darted through the slim gaps between them and popped up over Tamaki's shoulder. He drove an axe kick straight into Tamaki's shoulder, cracking the crustacean shell that covered it. Tamaki's legs snapped up. The boot fell apart, revealing eagle's talons underneath. The scaly foot, bound with rubber wrappings, clamped around Izuku's arm and squeezed painfully hard. Izuku gritted his teeth and used Tekai to weather the attack. Realizing that Izuku wasn't giving in, Tamaki lashed out with his tentacles. "Guys, I can't hold him for long." "You got it." Mirio slid through the floor, with head and arms above ground, and popped out in a mighty uppercut. Izuku let the hit fall, bent his neck back, and snapped up a foot laced with haki. Mirio let the kick land, only to get driven into the ceiling with a gut shot. Izuku hefted his arm up. Tamaki squawked and grabbed for the wall, but Izuku slammed his arm into the ground over and over and over. Tamaki bit into a cord around his neck, and a clam shell sprouted around his body. Izuku kept pounding, shattering the floor around him, while he kept a wary eye on Nejier. One arm prepared another light beam, while her other hand was stuck inside a pocket. Izuku aborted his takedown of Tamaki and blitzed towards Nejier. A light beam knocked him off course, but he leapt off the wall and sprang back towards her. Mirio popped to her defense, throwing a right hook with rubber knuckles, but Izuku let himself part around the blow. "Hey!" Mirio shouted, still wheezing and cradling his ribs. "You stole my trick." Nejier yelped as Izuku barreled towards her and threw both her hands out. Izuku dodged the beams, but the thrust those beams made propelled Nejier out of his reach. Grinning like a madman, Izuku leapt after her, readying lightning spears in each hand while dodging the looping beams and Mirio's surprise attacks. His first spear missed when Nejier threw herself aside, but his follow-up caught her square in the chest. She cried out and fell, with smoke drifting from her chest. Izuku ran over to confirm the takedown. A glimmer of light from her hands was the only warning he got before he got two facefuls of energy beams. "Ha!" Nejier peeled off her costume, revealing a rubber tracksuit underneath. "Gotcha." "You sure did." Nejier managed to say "OS" before Izuku's foot slammed into her stomach. She flew down a hallway, bouncing off the walls like a soccer ball, and she caught herself with two beams just before she flew out a window. Izuku stalked towards her. She fired both beams down the hallway, but Izuku hardened his arms and used them as a shield. Light fizzled on his haki-hardened skin as Izuku made one ponderous step after another. "Guys," Nejire shouted. "A little help here." That made Izuku pause. He could vaguely sense Mirio still, a ways below him, but Tamaki had vanished. Izuku ran through the possibilities as he pushed forward. Had Tamaki withdrawn, or was this a part of the scenario? Did Nejire know he was nearby, or was she trying to make Izuku hesitate? His answer came when he felt the bare whisper of a warning. Trusting his instincts, Izuku leapt up and through the ceiling. Behind where he had stood, the twin beams slammed into an invisible wall. Tamaki grimaced as the scales across his body changed color. "He heard me coming," he bemoaned. "I knew I should have stayed home today." "No, it's totally my fault," Nejire said. "I reminded him that you were still around. If I hadn't, you would have totally gotten him just now." "But would I really have? We ambushed him earlier, and that didn't work either." As the two hero students got closer together, Izuku felt his heart racing. Mirio was still out of the picture, giving him the perfect opportunity to take them both out in one move. From the floor above them, Izuku raised both hands in the air and brought them down in a massive shockwave that would have made Whitebeard proud. The ceiling shattered. Tiles and concrete rained down on Tamaki and Nejire. Tamaki raised a clam shell over his head, but that blinded him to Izuku's charge. Through the collapsing ceiling, Izuku bounced from piece to falling piece, darting towards Tamaki's backside. Nejire shouted a code word. Porcupine quills sprouted from Tamaki's back. But Izuku let the quills pass harmlessly through him, grabbed Tamaki's neck, and delivered enough of a zap to knock him out. Before Nejire could act, Izuku turned Tamaki around and used him as a spiky battering ram. Needles pinned Nejire's right arm to the wall. She fired at him with her left, but Izuku ducked under it and zapped her too. Izuku winced when he saw the needles stuck through Nejire's arm. "Better leave that there. Now, let's see if I can find that detonator." Wow, that was impressive. Izuku turned and threw a lightning bolt at Mirio's feet. Mirio yelped and leapt over the attack. "It's just you and me now," Izuku said. "Yep. And in all honesty, I have no idea how I would beat you." He held up a fist and said, "You're faster and stronger than me, and you can even hit me when I'm intangible. Luckily for me, I've got this. Rubber knuckles, cute, but it'll take more than that too." Mirio pressed into the side of the knuckles. Far above them, a muffled explosion went off. Flashes of light came through the window as fireworks went off over the building. Izuku slapped his face. "That ambush at the beginning, without the knuckles, that was to make me think you didn't have it, wasn't it?" Mirio shrugged. "Blame Nezu. I'm nowhere near smart enough to think of something like that. But still, that was an incredible fight. I don't even think most pros could keep up with you." Mirio looked at his pinned teammates and asked, "So, mind helping me with those two?" Back in the observation room, Izuku returned to a round of applause and cheers from most of the class. Kirishima wrapped an arm around his shoulder and said, "Dude, that was awesome. The way you used that one guy as a battering ram, manly as hell." I wasn't that great. I still lost." "That might be true, young Midoriya," All Might said. "But you were given a far greater challenge. You performed excellently, and I hope the rest of you were paying attention." As Izuku luxuriated in the praise and admiration of his classmates and returned Bakugo's apoplectic glare with an easy smile, Izuku finally felt like he belonged in his own world. Izuku stretched his arms as much as the cramped bus allowed him to. The exercise was supposed to be just search and rescue, but it was their first trip away from the classroom, and he wanted to be ready for anything. "Looks like someone's ready to go." Kirishima clapped him on the back and asked, "Got any more good pirate stories to tell us?" Izuku rolled his eyes. Half the class thought he was making things up for fun, and the other half thought him crazy. In no rush to correct their delusions, Izuku donned his best Usopp grin and said, "Did I ever tell you guys about the time I sailed on a ship up a massive geyser and landed in a sea made of clouds? But how would that even work, Tsuyu asked. Clouds are just water vapor. There was something in them that made them solid. But anyways, the people up there had white wings, and when the sun hit the clouds right, you could see their giant shadows dancing on the waves. Very friendly, and they know how to throw one heck of a party. Everybody throws parties in your stories. Yeah, because they're fun. So, the first time we were up there, Roger went off to find a devil fruit, leaving me with Luffy and Shanks at their village. Not long after they left, the village came under attack by a band of pirates on flying ships, and... All right, everyone off." Aizawa's voice cut cleanly through the story. The students listening closely all groaned and said it was just getting good. Izuku grinned at them, shot them a wink, and hopped straight out a window. The moment he entered the spacious building, he felt something off. A charge hung in the air, warning against an imminent bolt of lightning, and Izuku had a hunch that lightning wasn't him. With a shrug, Izuku reasoned that it couldn't be that bad with All Might there with them. The moment 13 approached them, they whispered to Aizawa that All Might had something come up. Well, it couldn't be that bad with two other pro-heroes there with them. Once 13 got through their explanation about rescue work, Izuku felt the electrifying sensation increase. It emanated from a swirling black void that appeared above the central fountain. Izuku gathered lightning in his hand and asked Aizawa, "Should I attack that ominous shadow over there?" Aizawa's eyes snapped towards the anomaly. "Stand down. You're only students. Save the fighting for the pros." His scarf unfurled around him, hovering in the air. "Everyone, make for the doors and stay together. Call for help, and don't engage unless you have no other option. I'm afraid I can't allow you to do that." A deep, courteous voice echoed from everywhere in the building. The shadow widened, and from its depths emerged a horde of villains. Another dark cloud emerged above the students and sprouted yellow eyes. "My name is Kirigiri, and today, it is my job to show you all despair." "I think not." Aizawa's scarf snapped out and grabbed them. A cloud formed around him, but Aizawa's eyes glowed, stopping the warp. "You're under arrest for trespassing. If you don't resist, that's all you'll be charged with." "I'll show you despair, you cloudy freak." Bakugo leapt into the air, propelling himself with explosions and blocking Aizawa's sight. The explosion passed harmlessly through Kirigiri, and the warper took advantage of the smoke to spirit Bakugo away. Children these days are so terrifying. It makes me feel less guilty for what I'm about to do. Izuku stalked forward, ready to impale Kirigiri with lightning, but Aizawa shot him a glare. Taking a deep breath, Izuku let the lightning fade away and waited for the teacher's next move. 13. Get the students out. I'll keep the crowd busy." Izuku glanced over the cannon fodder. He'd seen better out of Shiki and the Marines, but numbers and direct combat were hardly Aizawa's specialties. "I don't think that's a good idea, sir," Izuku told him. "I could take them easily. It's my job as a hero and a teacher. Besides, I wouldn't be here at UA if I was a one-trick pony." 13 put herself between the warper and the students while Aizawa charged at the villains. True to his words, Aizawa darted through them like a fish in a river, tripping villains with his scarf, making them attack each other, and disabling quirks when people least expected it. Meanwhile, 13 opened a black hole and drew the warper inside. Izuku caught the shimmer of darkness behind the teacher and hastily drew her back before they could be eviscerated by their own quirk. "It's no good. His quirk counters yours," Izuku pointed out. "If you'll just let me." "You heard, Aizawa. Run back to the school and get help." With 13 distracted, they reacted too late to the dark gas billowing around them. They only had time to stretch out a hand, trying in vain to engulf the villain, before they disappeared. Not a part of the plan, but I'm sure those villains I sent her to can improvise. Now, where was I? Finally alone, Izuku itched to chase after the villain. Yet, he saw how that worked out with Bakugo, and 2 teachers expressly forbid him to get involved. Racked by indecision, Izuku noticed too late the void engulfing him and spitting him out underwater. Izuku held his breath as his body lost its strength. The water was clear, and the bottom shallow compared to the other world's oceans. But with his feeble limbs, the surface may as well be a mile away. As he sank, a villain lurking in the water noticed him, grinned wickedly, and darted towards him like a shark. Izuku tried to use Tekai, but his muscles lacked the strength to even twitch. Bracing himself, Izuku watched rows of sharp teeth approach at an alarming speed. A flash of green sped out from behind him. Tsuyu's kick caught the villain on top of their head and drove them into the concrete bottom. Shark teeth and blood floated in the water. Tsuyu wrapped her arms around him, kicked off the bottom, and carried them both to the surface. As Izuku caught his breath, Tsuyu asked, "Can you swim?" Izuku mouthed the word no, still too exhausted to speak. Tsuyu caught the sentiment and angled her kicks towards a boat. Once they made it, she hauled him up the ladder and shouted, "Help me with him." "Seriously? He can't swim?" Minta asked. Once Izuku was back out of water, he said, "My quirk's weakness. I lose all my strength in standing water." "So, what? You can't take a bath either?" "I'd drown if I did." "Please focus," Tsuyu said. "There are more of them in the water. They have us surrounded." Minta shrieked and hid behind her. Izuku cracked his knuckles. "How many?" "I'll let you guys each take a third of them." "Midoriya, no." Tsuyu put a hand on Izuku's arm. "You heard what the teachers said. And because of it, I nearly died." Izuku's flat tone made her flinch. 13 almost died. Aizawa's hopelessly outnumbered, and everyone else is scattered through the facility and fighting villains of their own. I'm going to kick their asses." Tsuyu faltered, trying to come up with a response. Minta, however, said, "Perfect. You can take my share." Izuku gave him a calculating look, and Minta shriveled under his gaze. Shrugging, Izuku said, "More for me then." An icicle launched out of the water. Izuku caught the sharpened tip an inch from his face and shattered the ice in his grip. The villain yelped and ducked back underwater an instant before lightning crashed against the surface. "That's a problem. I can't hit them if they keep hiding down there." Tsuyu shook her head. "There's way too many of them for me." When they both looked at Minta, he hastily said, "My quirk's no good either. They just float on the surface. See?" Minta threw a sphere. It plopped on the water's surface. The villains warily backed away from the bobbing sphere. "Hey, let me try." Izuku plucked a sphere, only for it to instantly stick to his hand. Trying to grab it only resulted in getting his second hand stuck. Grunting angrily, Izuku tried wrenching his arms apart. "Hold on, let me." "The spheres only get unstuck when I touch them." Before Minta could grab his sphere, Izuku's arms crackled with electricity. The adhesive instantly came undone. Izuku hefted a sphere in his crackling hand and said, "I think I can work with this." He eyed the villains, who instantly dove under. Tracking one, Izuku wound back his arm and threw. The sphere impacted the water with a deafening crack, and an enormous splash shot high into the air. Once the water fell, an unconscious villain floated to the surface, tagged by Minta's sphere. "Tsuyu, look underwater and sight for me." "Minta?" Izuku held out his hand. "Another, please." Izuku hopped over the water's surface and waited for Tsuyu's signal. When he felt he had the right aim, Izuku fired, and another limp villain floated up. Blood trickled down Minta's head, and 20 villains bobbed alongside the boat when Tsuyu signaled the villains were taken down. Izuku hopped back, grabbed them both, and cleared the indoor lake with a few Jeppo hops. We could have run the whole time, Minta screeched. Suyu also gave Izuku an unapproving stare. And what would happen if another of our classmates fell in once we left? Izuku retorted. Knowing fully well that no one else could fight underwater like her, Suyu silently conceded. Over in the central plaza, Aizawa continued his one-man stand against the villain's cannon fodder. Izuku stopped to silently admire his handiwork. Don't tell me you're thinking about jumping in there, Suyu said blandly. I would if he needed it, Izuku answered. But he's got them handled. They're pretty weak. Pretty weak, Minta shouted. They could have killed us. So can a flight of stairs. Doesn't make them scary. Izuku felt the battle shift in an instant. 1 second, Aizawa had 4 villains tangled and knocked the lights out of a 5th. The next, bones crunched as Aizawa writhed in the monstrous grip of the Namu. Dead silence fell across the USJ as the villains stopped to stare in awe at the monster in their midst. The crowd parted, and Shigaraki strode forth to inspect the teacher at his mercy. You know, you're one of the coolest heroes. You don't beg for attention. You do your job and do it well. I almost don't want to kill you. His grin stretched wide, and he leaned close to say tauntingly, almost. Namu, kill him. Izuku saw it happen. Saw the Namu's fist squeeze tight. Saw his teacher pop like a balloon. His vision went red. The air shuddered as Izuku's single-minded will made itself manifest in a soul-shaking command. You will not harm him. Every person in the USJ felt it. Fights stopped cold as villain and hero student alike turned towards the plaza. At the epicenter, villains dropped senseless, crushed by the weight of Izuku's will. Kyojiri's eyes flickered, and Shigaraki buckled but stayed on his feet. The remaining villains collapsed like dominoes, in a wave of raw fury that rippled out from Izuku. Only the Namu remained unmoved, dead to all wills except its master. Izuku cleared the distance between him and the Namu in a green flash. His fist, coated in haki, slammed like a sledgehammer into the monster's forearm, shattering the bone buried beneath armored skin and hulking muscle into 1,000 pieces. The Namu's grip went slack. Izuku whisked Aizawa away from the villain's clutches and laid him down at the base of the stairs. Midoriya, Aizawa rasped. I told you to. I'd have listened if you could handle it. Aizawa grimaced. Weighing his option, he said, Don't kill anyone. I'll try not to. Izuku turned back to his opponent. The mangled arm knit itself back together, and the creature showed no discomfort on its distorted face. Shigaraki scratched at his neck in annoyance. You're the special side quest Sensei gave me. He really wants you dead. Izuku cracked his knuckles. Then he can get in line. I've dealt with far scarier than you lot. Big words from a wannabe hero. Namu, crush him. The Namu rushed over and slammed its arms onto Izuku's head. Izuku let the hands pass through him, blurring his body in an electric haze before it seamlessly reassembled itself. With the Namu crouched, Izuku punched its head into the ground. He punched over and over, again and again, chipping away at the stone beneath them and driving its skull deeper into the ground. The Namu's arms crashed in a clapping motion around Izuku's chest. Izuku slipped backwards and crouched into a fighting stance, while the Namu pried itself out of the ground. Stone shards plopped from its face as its flesh mended itself. What kind of hacking bullshit is this? Shigaraki roared. Just die already. I could say the same for this thing. Izuku pointed at the Namu. How many quirks does it have? Enough to kill All Might, and more than enough to deal with a pest like you. Shigaraki's eyes scoured the area. When his gaze fell upon Eraserhead, he said, Ignore the brat. Kill Eraserhead instead. Izuku felt a flash of panic as the Namu bolted towards the fallen hero. The Namu's fist crashed down, threatening to pulp him in one hit. Izuku threw himself in the punch's path and braced. The ground beneath his feet buckled, but Izuku himself stood firm. "Ha," Shigaraki crowed. "Not everyone has the same hitbox erasing bullshit as you do. Let's see how long it takes to crush you." The Namu punched down again, and again, and again. Each impact rattled Izuku's bones, and bruises quickly welled up all along his forearms. The blows drove his feet deeper and deeper into the concrete like a nail. Abandoning defense, Izuku took a hit on his jaw and threw a roundhouse punch. Izuku staggered back, nursing a swollen cheek, and the Namu forcefully realigned its own jaw. With a mindless roar, the Namu charged again, and again. Izuku met it blow for blow. Over time, Izuku's injuries mounted up, but the Namu's wounds seamlessly vanished. Izuku huffed and wheezed as all the exertion sapped his strength. "Looks like the wannabe hero's getting tired." Shigaraki watched with rapt attention as his monster fought on. "You're a DPS cosplaying as a tank, while my Namu is the whole package. You talked such a big game earlier. I thought you could do more than be my Namu's punching bag." Izuku realized that just punching the Namu would do nothing, but he also noticed that the wounds took time to heal. The healing hadn't slowed down, which meant the only way to deal with it was to attack it faster than it can heal. Izuku grabbed both its arms and kicked both feet into its chest. The Namu barely staggered back, but it gave Izuku time and room to prepare his attack. "Oh, I can," Izuku told Shigaraki. "Watch me." He raised both arms and filled them with as much electrical energy as he could manage. His fists glowed with haki, and wisps of static drifted from them. Rumble, gattling. Izuku's fists flashed forward, one after the other, too fast for the eye to track. The impact's left fist shaped indents across the Namu's chest. The monster held its ground, planting its feet and weathering the assault head-on. With a furious roar, Izuku sped up. Distinct punches overlapped into an electrical arc, striking continuously and filling the air with a smell of ozone. The Namu took one step back, then another. Its skin peeled away, and bits of its flesh vaporized under each charged blow. Its ribs shattered, its organs turned to pulp, and still it stood, staring down Izuku with its lifeless gaze. Izuku smashed in its beak, crushed its eyes, spattered its brain across the shattered ground. And still, the Namu stood. Izuku shouted with all his might. His fists sounded like the blurred retorts of a Gatling gun and fell with the same frequency. Even as the Namu's body frantically drew itself back together, Izuku's fist dashed it apart. Punch after punch, Izuku carved his way through the Namu until his fists broke out the other side. When he no longer felt resistance, Izuku slowed his punches. Mist and glowing plasma obscured the battleground, but when it faded away, it revealed the Namu's legs, still standing, ending in a bloodied stump where its torso once rested. Bits of burnt flesh lay scattered across the ground, pulped and charred into unrecognizable masses. An eternity passed in a single second as every villain and student watched the Namu for any signs of life. The legs twitched. The mangled flesh at the stump bubbled outward, rapidly regrowing its torso. Shigaraki let out a shaky laugh and said, "That's right, Namu, you're indestructible. Sensei said so. Now, Namu, kill the heroes." Izuku braced himself, but the monster didn't move. Confused, Shigaraki shouted, "Namu, kill them now." The Namu had no ears to hear with. Realizing this, Izuku knew he had seconds until it attacked again. He could attack Shigaraki, but he couldn't risk the Namu following its previous orders while he was distracted. He had to finish the Namu. If 1,000,000 punches couldn't get the job done, then he'd have to do it with one. Izuku's legs and left arm shrunk as he funneled the electrons away from those areas, leaving them little spindles of lightning. His right arm billowed out, growing to a giant's proportions. It wobbled, struggling to maintain its size, but Izuku held it through sheer force of will. The Namu had regained its arms, and the writhing flesh creeped up its regrowing neck. Namu, Shigaraki shrieked. Move, dodge, do something. With a firm voice, hiding his exhaustion, Izuku said, Gear second. Haki appeared in thin patches along the arm, until it formed an even coating. Thor's hammer. Move. The Namu's face regrew. Its ears caught its master's orders as Izuku threw his punch. Yet, for how fast the abomination could move, it was powerless against the attack rushing towards it. Izuku's fist rocketed forward at speeds best measured in fractions of the speed of light. The very air shattered, set alight with 1,000 motes of plasma as Izuku sucked the charge out of each atom and hurled it forward. A visible shockwave rippled out from Izuku's knuckles, ripping apart the earth and hurling unconscious villains in its wake. When Izuku's fist collided with a Namu, no simple transfer of force sealed the monster's fate. The air in the fist's path, given insufficient time to scatter and stuck between the rock and hard place that were Izuku and the Namu, were squeezed under temperatures and pressures one would find at the heart of a dying star. And thus, for the briefest of moments, the Ust was illuminated with the brilliant corona of the star forged by Izuku's will. Atoms squeezed together, protons and neutrons crushed to briefly form an atom visible to the naked eye, a speck of subatomic matter nearly dense enough to collapse into a black hole. As inertia gave way and the air pushed the Namu back, the incredible pressure holding the star together abated. The single atom had space to expand, and as it did, it tore itself apart into millions of smaller elements. Matter turned into energy, and in that minuscule space between Izuku and the Namu, that expanding force had two directions in which it could expand. One of those wasn't held together with Haki. All told, the matter compressed together and destroyed amounted to a fraction of the power wielded by the first atomic bombs. But even a fraction of the power that broke nations, coupled with the sheer force Izuku himself wielded, directed in a singular direction, was enough to turn the Namu into a meat slurry as it shot through the roof of the Ust and scattered itself across the atmosphere, so thoroughly destroyed down to the individual cells that no quirk could ever draw it back together. No one beholding it understood exactly what had happened, including Izuku. Beholding it, Izuku only felt a sense of exhausted triumph. But everyone else, student, teacher, and villain alike, felt the primal fear that came of witnessing incalculable power, seeing its afterimage seared into their retinas, hearing the air shriek like a wounded animal, and feeling their feet leave the ground as the shockwave it made rattled their bones. As the explosion echoed into silence, the only sound in the Ust was the heavy rasp of Izuku's breathing. His limbs flickered like television static, but his eyes stared resolutely forward, glowing with crazed defiance. Well, Izuku asked the silence room. Who's next? Shigaraki ground his teeth. For all that his arms and legs shook uncontrollably, he still took a faltering step forward. His eyes were bloodshot with madness and curses and vows of vengeance hung lightly on his tongue, but Kurogiri wrapped himself around him like a veil. Without a word, the two villains vanished, leaving the cannon fodder behind. Izuku cast his gaze around the building, feeling each foreign presence within. The villains whimpered and threw themselves to the ground as they felt Izuku's attention linger on them. Within seconds, the remaining villains surrendered. The Ust doors flew open. Light poured into the broken facility as All Might strode inside. Never fear, he shouted, for I am. His voice broke off as he took in the facility's ruined state. Villains lay in tangled heaps, some bent at unnatural angles, and the ground looked as though he had thrown a few punches at it. Aizawa lay wheezing and broken at the foot of the stairs, in a slim sliver of untouched stone that lay in Izuku's shadow. Izuku himself still stood triumphant, fists clenched and eyes searching for foes, but All Might recognized the clenched smile of a hero concealing their fatigue from his televised reflection, and saw the deep purple bruises spreading up his shoulder. Both his arms were mangled, and his face sported swollen lumps. Not needed, apparently, All Might finished meekly. With a gesture from him, The other U.S. staff poured into the building and set about administering first aid and apprehending the villains. All Might bounded downstairs to investigate ground zero of whatever destroyed the building. He knelt beside Aizawa and gently assessed his injuries. Broken ribs, shattered arm, but no punctured lung or other immediately fatal injuries. As All Might rose, Aizawa caught his pants leg with 2 fingers. All Might knelt closer and bent his ear as Eraserhead whispered, "Izuku did this. Tell Nezu he needs to run damage control. Rest, Aizawa. We will take care of the rest." Unsettled, All Might cautiously walked up to Izuku and gave him a gentle tap on the shoulder. Izuku flinched, but his arms stayed by his sides. "Hey, you're late to the party." Izuku said it with an easy smile, as if his arms hadn't been smashed to hamburger. "Got held up in traffic," All Might absently bantered back. "The fight is over. Let's get you to Recovery Girl." "Huh? What for?" All Might gestured at his arms. Izuku couldn't even move his right, but he brought his left in front of his eyes. "Oh, I can just sleep it off. Mind showing me to a bed? I wouldn't want to fall asleep wherever like Ace." Izuku made it out of the building, out of sight of the detained villains and injured students, before he collapsed in a puddle of green static. All Might frantically scooped up as much as he could carry and sprinted for Recovery Girl's office. Izuku sat up in the hospital bed, stretched his arms, and bent his spine until loud popping noises echoed in the tiny room. Yawning, Izuku looked around, wondering how he had gotten there. "Oh right," he said. "That was a good fight." Recovery Girl froze halfway through opening the door. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed a rubber cane and beat Izuku over the head with it. "A good fight, you say?" Recovery Girl asked. "You came in here as a puddle of static goo in All Might's hands. I didn't even recognize you at first. It took 12 hours of running the emergency generators non-stop just to get your body back in one piece. Then another 6 to fix your arms up. If it hadn't been for that friend of yours, I wouldn't have even known where to begin." "Who, May? Is she okay? The villains didn't attack anywhere else in the school, right?" His questions earned him another smack on the head. "Priorities, young man. Get those sorted out before you turn yourself into a puddle again." Wearing rubber gloves, she grabbed his wrists and carefully prodded his arms. "You had hairline fractures all over your right arm. How you didn't shatter it completely is a mystery to me. I'd also say you were concussed, if there was any brain left rattling around that skull of yours." Izuku chuckled awkwardly. "Sorry, it kinda happens, you know. Nothing a little sleep and a glass of milk can't fix." This time, Izuku caught the cane and cheekily grinned at her. Recovery Girl dropped the cane and swatted him with her hand. "Enough of that. May told me you'd be starving once you woke up. Is that right?" Izuku's grumbling stomach answered for him. Recovery Girl shook her head. "Teenagers. I don't know why she brought so much over. You need to take it easy since you." Recovery Girl looked back at the cart. Entire pots of porridge, heaping plates of scrambled eggs, piles of buttered toast with multiple jars of jam, and a whole host of other breakfast foods haphazardly heaped onto the cart had disappeared in a flash. She looked back at Izuku, whose cheeks bulged like an oversized hamster. "Don't you dare." Izuku swallowed. The bulge of food crept down his throat and slammed into his stomach like a wrecking ball. He let out a satisfied belch and patted his distended stomach. Wow, that was almost as good as Sanji's food. "Hey, Recovery Girl, got any dessert? I've got a bit more room in here." Recovery Girl gawked at him. She lifted her cane, but after a moment, shook her head and lowered it. I thought she was crazy when she said it wouldn't be enough. "Well, if you want more, it'll have to wait until Nezu's done with you. He wants to talk with you as soon as you're able to get out of that bed." Izuku threw the covers off of him and leapt onto his feet. "Guess I'll get going then. Thanks for fixing me up." As he dashed out the door, Recovery Girl shouted after him. You better stay that way, you hear me? It hadn't occurred to Izuku that he might not be expected in Nezu's office until he flung the door open. But evidently, the principal had expected him anyway. Nezu had an empty chair set out, with a steaming cup of tea and a whole platter of pastries laid out in front of it. Izuku sat down and shoved desserts into his mouth. Recovery Girl said you wanted to see me, Izuku asked with his mouth full. Indeed I do. We need to talk about the USG and how the HPSC is choosing to handle it. Did I do anything wrong? Between you and me, no. You saved Aizawa's life and your fellow students, and for that, I consider the villain's deaths very much justified. Izuku froze, with a pastry halfway inside his mouth. It fell out and plopped back onto the plate. I didn't mean to. I made sure I held back this time. Taking a deep breath, he asked, how did they die? Setting aside that this time comment for later, Nezu said, prompting a wince from Izuku. 4 drowned to death after being rendered unconscious in the water. And 2 more died of internal injuries from getting pelted with those sticky projectiles. Minta and Suyu both claim you through. Izuku gaped. That killed them? I barely put any muscle into those. Such are the dangers of your strength, Midoriya. We'll have additional control training to prevent that in the future. As for the rest, the shockwave from your final punch caused numerous spinal injuries, fractured bones, and radiation burns. Recovery Girl helped hide the extent of what you did. But nevertheless, the aftermath of your fight with the Namu has raised concerns within the HPSC. Am I in trouble? Izuku asked. Hardly. The villains trespassed onto Yua property with clear intent to kill, and you acted in self-defense. However, that hasn't stopped the HPSC from painting your actions in an unfavorable light. They have publicized the casualty list and images of the damage you left behind, and they have the news painting you as a dangerous and unstable student. Already, they're starting petitions to have you removed from the hero course and taken into the HPSC's care for remedial studies and therapy. Izuku's jaw twitched. They want me to be their puppet. Oh, I didn't expect you to catch that so fast. You're a sharp one. So how do I stop them? The good news is, you have the perfect opportunity to turn around public opinion. The sports festival is a couple weeks away, and a large enough live event that they won't be able to cover up or edit your actions there. So, am I supposed to win it or lose? Whichever you prefer, but the important thing is to put on a good show. Come up with what brand of hero you want to be and sell that image to the crowd. Do that well enough, and it'll make discrediting you much harder for the HPSC. All right then. The bad news. The bad news is, the HPSC is citing the recent incident as reason not to trust UA with their own sports festival, and they've strong-armed their way into managing the event and its security themselves. Which means they'll arrange the event to make me look as bad as possible. Exactly. Do you have any idea what they're going to do? Exactly. They'll have their own announcers, so expect them to paint you in a very unfavorable light. I managed to retain control over what events are selected, so at least they can't rig the matchups against you. Izuku thoughtfully nibbled on a pastry. This all seems too complicated. I just want to help people. Then show that to the world in the sports festival. Nezu checked his computer and said, You're more than welcome to return home if you're feeling unwell. But I have a feeling. I'm good. Class started, right? That you would say that, Nezu finished. They're still in homeroom, so don't feel any need to rush. Izuku slammed his tea in one gulp, scooped up the rest of the pastries, and bolted out of the room. Nezu sighed and went back to sending a scathing email to the HPSC director. Ignoring shouts from Hound Dog not to run in the hallways, Izuku sprinted down the halls fast enough to leave skid marks. He flung the homeroom door open and looked around. Cool, you're all still in one piece. Sorry I'm late. The room's temperature dropped a few degrees. And for once it wasn't Todoroki's fault. Most of his classmates avoided his gaze, though Kirishima gave him a cheerful wave, while Bakugo glared at him with crossed arms. Izuku felt his appetite vanish as he took in the timid and wary glances of his classmates. He had expected a hero's return, expected them celebrating and congratulating him on a good fight. He tried to imagine what he did wrong, then realized it must have been the deaths. Or the news. He had no idea what the news actually said. But was it so terrible they all decided to hate him for it? "Have a seat and stop disrupting class," Aizawa scolded. "I'd lecture you on making sure you fully recover, but I don't set a proper example." The bandages around his chest crinkled as he sat in his chair. Once Izuku took his seat, Yaoyorozu raised her hand. "Excuse me, sir. I know we had already done our student council elections, which are final," Aizawa cut in firmly. "Do not waste time." "Like hell they are," Mina shouted. "Are we really going to let him stay president after what he did? You all saw it. He punched that thing until it." She cut off, turning green around her cheeks, and she wasn't the only one. Izuku scratched his head, confused. "Until I got rid of it. I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Siro snorted. "You killed 20 people, and there's more in a coma." "Would you rather that I let them kill you?" Izuku asked. "And kill our teachers?" Aizawa's scarf cracked like a whip. Half the class flinched as the sound sliced through the argument. "Enough. The ethics of killing villains will be a thoroughly discussed topic in your ethics classes, and while as students you are expected not to make that decision until you graduate, and will face consequences for doing so. Midoriya made a judgment call that you chose to accept due to the dire circumstances you all faced. Whatever you hear from the HPSC, whatever you think of what you saw Izuku do, remember that, at minimum, saved my life, and likely saved all of yours as well." Suyu raised a hand. "What about the villains in the flood zone? He wasn't trying to kill them, and they died anyway." At that, Aizawa balked. "None of you come here with a perfect understanding of your quirks and strength. Izuku would hardly be the first to have overestimated a villain's ability to survive an attack. Nor will he be the last. Any one of you could just as easily kill someone by mistake." Aizawa stared down Todoroki and Bakugo as he said that. Izuku clenched his hands. He thought he had learned that control back in the other world. Had he really lost control, or were the villains here far weaker than he was used to? Ida's hand shot up. "Sir, I must insist, given the recent controversy, is Midoriya really the best suited to represent us? His behavior and attitude are far too violent for a proper hero. Why, he's almost as bad as Bakugo." "Up yours, 4 eyes," Bakugo shot back. "Enough," Aizawa snapped. "You all made a decision, and now you have to live with the consequences. If you must, consider this a lesson in dealing with hostile press, as I guarantee you that, at some point in your careers, the same will happen to you. Make one mistake on the job, and the press will have a field day with it. They'll take a magnifying lens to your every action and criticize every decision you made. And in such cases," Ida cut in, "heroes are often called to retire should their actions be found too extreme. Shouldn't Midoriya face those same consequences?" Aizawa tapped a finger on his desk. "I see you won't be considering this rationally. Very well. A show of hands. How many of you wish for Izuku to no longer be class president?" Izuku felt his heart sink as 12 hands rose at once. Suyu hesitated, meeting his gaze for a moment, and ultimately kept her hand down. Todoroki and Takoyami looked around with bored expressions, while Shoji and Sato gave him sympathetic looks. Aoyama looked as though he was debating with himself, but his hand also remained down. Kirishima had his arms crossed and gave Izuku a nod, while Bakugo snorted and mumbled about all of them being cowards. "This is a clear majority," Ida stated, "which should be enough to." "I see," Aizawa said. "The flat, Impassive tone made Ida back down. And of you, how many feel that I should expel Midoriya from this class? After a few seconds, half of the hands fell. Ida and Yaoyorozu were first to withdraw, and seeing them withdraw their hands, Jiru and Sato did the same. After a little longer, Ochako's hand fell, followed by Ojiro's. Aizawa swung his gaze around the room, as if daring the holdouts to keep their hands up. Minta held his hand firmly in the air and looked around as if trying to muster support, while Kaminari and Mina looked vaguely ashamed of themselves. Hagakir's expression was unreadable, and Koda hid his behind his upheld arm. Were UAS every actions not under extreme and unusual surveillance by the HPSC, the 5 of you with your hands still raised would be packing your things, and I would be telling the other 6 that they almost joined you. Minta's jaw dropped, and Kaminari and Mina both quickly hid their hands under their desks. Ida stood and shouted out, "But sir, that's highly unfair. Midoriya's actions were clearly unheroic, and were they? Are you telling me that no hero has ever killed a villain?" The class had no answer for that. In the silence, Todoroki said, "Endeavor kills multiple villains a week. He says it saves time and lives." Aizawa frowned darkly at that line. "I hope you don't share your father's opinion on the merits of killing villains for convenience's sake." Todoroki met him stare for stare. "I won't be anything like him." Aizawa nodded. "Good. But back to my original point. If each and every one of you were to become pro-heroes someday, I guarantee you that all of you, at some point, will kill a villain. Certain rescue teams and underground heroes specialized in surveillance and tracking can go their careers without any fatalities. But any limelight hero, fighting villains in public with numerous bystanders, will one day have a call to make when the villain decides those bystanders are an easier target." Aizawa let his capture scarf unfurl and stroked a section of it. "All Might's done it. Endeavor's done it. I and every teacher in this building has at least one kill under their belt. And when that time comes, if you're not ready to put that villain down, it will be a child, or a mother, or a husband, going home in a casket. If what Midoriya did made you feel too uncomfortable to stay near him, the door is right over there. You can either pay Hound Dog a visit, which I recommend for all of you, or you can tender your resignation to the principal." No one moved. Aizawa gave them a moment to change their minds before turning on a projector. "Back to my original topic, the sports festival. Compete, win, get recognition from pro heroes. End of lecture." "But sir," Ida said, "you never covered the events, or how we get internships, or—" "I would have had time for all that if you hadn't interrupted me." The bell rang, and Aizawa went to the door. Time for sparring practice. The moment they lined up in the gym, Izuku felt the literal gap that had formed between him and the rest of the class. Even the people who stayed silent on his behalf avoided him, and the ones that had wanted him gone actively hid from him and looked away the moment he caught them staring. Only Kirishima made any effort to bridge the gap between them, sauntering over and asking if he really feels up for a few rounds. Izuku chuckled and shot back by asking if he was ready. "Pick partners before I pick them for you." With many a frightened glance at Izuku, everyone practically leapt at each other. Bakugo ignored the few wanting to spar with him and walked over to Izuku. "You, me. Let's do this." "Let's not." Katsuki growled through gritted teeth. "What? I'm not good enough for you? I'm the only one in this sorry lot who stands half a chance against you." "You sound awfully confident you could beat me," Todoroki observed. "Eh? What was that, Isahat? Think because your daddy's such a big shot that you're any good?" A wisp of flame curled around Todoroki's side before he ruthlessly smothered it. "I'm good in spite of him, not because of him." "All right, prove it then." As Bakugo and Todoroki squared off against each other, Kirishima awkwardly asked, "So, I guess you two have history." "You could say that. It's just us two then, huh?" Kirishima laughed. Come on, don't make it sound like we got picked last for dodgeball. I wouldn't have it any other way. As Izuku took the other side of the ring, he felt every pair of eyes on him. He felt his usual thrill at an impending battle, but worry and hesitation tempered it. He had killed villains by accident, and he could just as easily imagine himself accidentally frying Kirishima. Hey, think you can do that giant punch thing again? Kirishima asked, hardening his body. I want to see if I can take it. Izuku laughed anxiously. That one took a lot out of me. I better stick with simpler stuff, you know? Kirishima's smile faltered. Ah, right. Guess you were laid up in the nurse's office, weren't you? Izuku slipped the C-prism manacles in his pocket around his wrists. Just come at me with whatever you got. I'll let you know if it's too much. If you're sure. Kirishima charged and swung a massive right hook. Izuku ducked easily under it and had to hold himself back from punching into his exposed side. Kirishima threw more punches, and each time, Izuku stepped or bent out of the way. How'd you learn how to move like this? Kirishima said between panted breaths, dodging cannonballs thrown by a marine. Fine, don't tell me. Izuku rolled his eyes as he rolled backwards on his heels, letting the fist graze the tip of his nose before rocketing his head forward. Before he could think better of it, skull met skull with a solid asterisk thunk asterisk that echoed across the room. Dead silence fell as everyone stopped sparring to stare. Mina gasped in fright, and Aizawa had his scarf unfurled, ready to intervene. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, Izuku began in a rush. Kirishima busted out laughing. Damn dude, you're the only person I've met with a skull as solid as mine. I actually felt that one. Izuku sighed in relief. Still, even knowing Kirishima could take a hit or two, Izuku still had to hold back. It felt like play fighting with a toddler, compared to the punishment Luffy or Sanji could dish out. As he went through the motions, he found himself wishing to go back, to where everything seemed so much simpler, and he could fight without holding himself back. Izuku shook the thought away. He wouldn't go back, not until he achieved his goal. But to do that, he didn't just need to be strong. If anything, his strength was making it harder. But All Might had to be stronger than him, and he was the #1 hero. All Might was stronger than him, wasn't he? A fist rammed into his face. Izuku barely felt the impact, but instinct made him grab the wrist and bodily hurl Kirishima towards the far wall. He left a Kirishima-shaped crater in the padding that lined the practice room and hit the floor with a wheeze. Sorry, I got distracted. Kirishima massaged his wrist. Your quirk makes you lightning fast. Pun not intended. I didn't even see you move. But that wasn't my quirk. Izuku held up his forearms. These turn it off. No way, for real? You did all that quirkless. Bakugo's head snapped towards him. Izuku flexed a muscle and asked, Does this look like a quirk to you? Has to be, to throw me that far. Why don't we put it to the test then? Izuku slipped the armbands off and held up a crackling orb of electricity. Aizawa-sensei, if you wouldn't mind. Izuku pointedly didn't look at his teacher, yet the electricity fizzled out the moment Aizawa activated his quirk. With the lightning still inactive, Izuku dashed forward and punched the wall hard enough to punch through the foam and hit concrete. Izuku shook off his arm. See? No quirk. He had hoped that the demonstration would prove that he wasn't simply an insanely powerful quirk, that he was strong by his own merit, and not someone to be afraid of. If anything, proving his strength wasn't a quirk made them even more afraid. How the heck did you do that? Minta screeched. Like, no quirk, and you can just punch through concrete like it's wet toilet paper. How? Izuku flexed a bicep. I work out. Total silence greeted his statement. Sensing the unease in the room, Aizawa said, My quirk doesn't work on mutant types. If some aspect of your quirk improved your physical strength, Aizawa let the implication trickle across the room. The students all relaxed slightly after Aizawa's explanation. "Oh, guess it's a part of your quirk then," Ajiro said. "I mean, I've been practicing martial arts since I was a kid, and I couldn't move anywhere near that fast." Izuku felt his heart sink. He tried to explain how he got so strong, and they all dismissed it as impossible. The gulf spanning them got wider and wider, no matter what he tried. Despondently, he turned back to Kirishima and raised his fists. He let Kirishima get a few punches in, but he barely felt them with Tekai hardening his body. As he thought over the problem his strength posed, he wondered how he should handle the sports festival. He could sweep through it easily, but what would the audience think? Would he seem even more terrifying to them if no one could keep up with him? But at the same time, holding back would solve nothing. If he wanted to be the #1 hero, he had to prove himself. And in order to prove himself, he needed someone to prove himself against. But who could match him in this class? Bakugo once seemed invincible to him, but now his wild punches and uncontrolled explosions solicited only pity. Todoroki. His ice was impressive, but he had no endurance and struggled in close quarters. And no one else in class could even hold a candle to those two. Who did that leave? General studies. Support? Mei might hold her own against him. She got the jump on Kizaru after all. But what were the odds they'd run into each other? Would she make it all the way to the finals or bow out after advertising her inventions? "Are you sure you're up for this?" Kirishima asked. "I get that I'm not in your league at all, but hitting you while you stare off into space just feels wrong." Izuku snapped back to attention. He had no idea how long he had been staring there muttering to himself. He chuckled awkwardly and said, "Sorry about that, just thinking. Again. About what happened in class." Izuku's lack of response was answer enough. Kirishima sighed. "Mina and I went to primary school together. I don't think it was cool of her to, It's fine. I get it. I felt like Yue would be a fresh start, and people were actually liking me. But now," with a sigh, Izuku said, "if only I could make someone else as strong as I am." It was like a light bulb went off in his head. He remembered Rayleigh's warnings about how dangerous it was, but surely someone in Yue could endure what he did. So, who had the most willpower? Bakugo came to mind first, but he ruthlessly shoved the thought aside. Todoroki was just as strong, but Izuku could tell with half an eye on his fight that he was holding back. That left the one other person with the guts to step into the ring against him. "Hey Kirishima," Izuku asked, voice low so no one else would hear. "Want to get as strong as I am?" "This isn't a good idea," Mei said without looking up from the gauntlet she was tinkering with. "Feels weird with you saying that," Izuku quipped. "I'll rinse my mouth out after this. It's still a bad idea. It'll be fine. It worked out great for me, and I was far weaker than Kirishima when I did it." While waiting for Kirishima to arrive, Izuku sampled Yue's exercise equipment. He had no idea how to use the more complicated machines, but they had a dumbbell and barbell collection that would have made Zoro greener with envy. Izuku could barely even lift the heaviest ones, with weights measured in fractions of tons. And you needed Crocus to fix you up afterwards. How well do you think the school nurse will take it if you show up with Kirishima dying in your arms? Izuku shuddered when he imagined Recovery Girl's reaction. He could feel the old woman's cane smacking his skull like a pinata. It's not like it'll be that bad. He'll just need food and bed rest. Mei slotted a dial into the gauntlet. When she slipped her arm inside, the metallic fingers curled, and a wisp of flame trailed around her fingertips. "We don't even know how it works. What if it doesn't work in this world? Then we could always take Kirishima there. Can't be anything more than the air and the food that makes it work." "Well, you should at least let your teacher know you're doing this." "I let Aizawa know we were using the gym," Izuku said nervously. "And did you maybe mention to him you were planning to work Kirishima down to his literal bones?" Izuku experimented with warping his body as he lifted the weight. Though his arms stretched out to noodle-like proportions, the dumbbell remained steady in the air. Look, when I showed that my strength didn't come from a quirk, he freaked out about it and covered it up. If I said I was doing the same thing for someone else, he would probably stop it from happening. Which would probably be for the best. What do you have against Kirishima? Nothing. I'm glad you didn't try to do this with Bakugo. If you picked him, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I'd be talking to your homeroom teacher instead. Izuku flinched, and a dumbbell nearly slipped from his hand. While he strained to keep it under control, Mei shrugged off her gauntlet and set it on the bench beside her. I don't think it's bad you want to help your classmates get stronger. I just think you're not thinking this through and doing this too quickly. That's rich coming from you. Remember those rocket-powered rollerblades? I remember. You told me they weren't a bad idea, but you didn't stop me from doing it anyways. I'm doing the same thing. With a twinkle in her eye, Mei added, and what do you think it says that I still want to make rocket-powered rollerblades and yet think this clandestine training montage is a bad idea? Her quip made Izuku hesitate. He wasn't blind to the risks, and he could already imagine all the ways trying to toughen up Kirishima could go horribly wrong. And yet, I'm tired of everyone being afraid of me. I thought people would finally like me, but after the Asji, Mei, they tried to vote me out of the class. It's only been a couple days. They'll settle down once the news blows over. Then there's the sports festival. Izuku set the dumbbells down and took a seat next to Mei. 1A is supposed to be the strongest class, and I don't even need the Rokushiki to beat most of them, let alone this. Sparks danced between his fingers, illuminating his face with flickering green light. Then there's the HPSC, planning to use the event to make me look like a villain and stop me from becoming a hero. Either I hold myself back and look like an asshole for toying with them, or I go all out and get called a brute for stomping them into the dirt. But if there's someone else as strong as I am, someone who can hold their own against me, then I can go all out without worrying. And if anyone can take it, it's Kirishima. Have you talked with your teachers about this? They might have a better idea of how to handle it. Nezu's the one that told me all about the whole HSPC thing. If he didn't have any better ideas about it, why would one of the teachers? Mei shrugged. Just wanted to make sure you thought this through. Well, I'll be here if something goes wrong. She held out a dial. Juice this up for me, would you? Izuku flicked a jolt of lightning into the shell. Mei hit the button, and the open end crackled with sparks. Whoa, Kirishima said. Did you just turn that seashell into a taser? They're dials, Izuku said. They're... Mei elbowed him in the ribcage. Izuku winced and rubbed the spot. A specialty of Mei's, Izuku amended. Sweet. Are you planning on using those for the sports festival? Mei gave Izuku a glance. Nah, this is just a side project. I already have my best babies lined up for the festival. I see, Kirishima cracked his knuckles and said. So, how does this thing work? Some sort of ancient kung fu secrets? Teaching me the secrets of the universe. You push your limits until you bleed. Then you keep going. I don't know if that sounds super manly or super horrifying. Not too late to back out, Mei called out. Kirishima gave a broad grin and said, Back down from a challenge? Never. Izuku hefted one of the barbell weights and spun it on his palm. You need to be absolutely certain about this, he said, voice cold as the iron dancing on his hand. You need to give this everything you have. You need to keep pushing on even as every fiber of your body screams at you to stop. You'll feel your muscles tear, your bones crack, your heart fluttering in your chest, just another step away from giving it out. And you'll need to take that step, and another. Can you do that? For a fraction of a second, hesitation flashed across Kirishima's face. Then his resolve hardened, along with his face, and he shouted out, You bet. I won't let anything stop me from being the manliest hero possible. Izuku crushed the doubt fluttering in his chest. Then let's get started. We don't have any cannonballs around here, but I saw a video that gave me an idea. The idea in question involved putting barbell weights around Kirishima's arms and legs until he resembled a tubular metal golem. Kirishima sagged with his own weight and iron weighing down his limbs. Man, this is almost as much as I bench. You're not going to make me run in this, are you? Just walk. From one end of the room to the next. He handed Kirishima a Sharpie and said, "Make a mark every time you make it to a wall." Kirishima nodded resolutely, but his hand struggled to raise high enough to take it. Then he plodded off, making clanking noises with each step. While Kirishima trudged through his first lap, Izuku went back to lifting his own weight. "Do you think I put on enough weight?" Izuku asked. "I think we could fit another set above his knees. Maybe make sure what he's got won't break his kneecaps first." Kirishima raised a trembling arm and made a squiggly line on the wall. "How many of these do I gotta do?" "You'll know when you're done," Izuku said. Mei shook her head. If this was working, he wouldn't have asked. He just has to get into the zone first. It'll happen. For all that Izuku feigned nonchalance and confidence, every fiber of his being felt wired with anxious energy. Even as he curled with one arm and paged through a book with the other, he kept one eye on every ponderous step Kirishima took. His ears caught every clank and scrape of metal, and he felt every flicker of charge coursing through Kirishima's body. Back and forth, Kirishima plodded across the room. His hardened feet left dents and scuff marks on the wooden floor, and the wood groaned piteously beneath his weight. Another mark wriggled down the far wall, followed by another, and another. Tally marks crisscrossed each other willy-nilly, spread out wherever Kirishima staggered to, and he didn't even bother trying to group them in bundles of 5. "You put yourself through this?" Mei asked. "For a whole night?" "I didn't realize how long it was until I stopped." Kirishima teetered. He tried to flail his arms, but the weight around them kept them drooping towards the floor. Tipping slowly, Kirishima grit his teeth and hardened his legs until his movement crunched to a stop. He stood there, leaning halfway to the left, balanced at the precipice of gravity's pull. The slightest breath of wind would have sent him crashing to the floor, and quite possibly through it. Yet, with a guttural growl, Kirishima shifted his foot, settling his weight firmly beneath his stance. Righted once more, Kirishima clanked for a few more steps, and made his 50th mark. He's a hard one to think of support gear for. Mei studied him consideringly. Something to give him range is obvious, but boring. Can't be something worn, not with his quirk. Can his hardened skin withstand fire? Remembering a bout between Kirishima and Bakugo, Izuku said, "A little bit, but he still burns." Mei grunted and turned back to her gauntlet. "Range and mobility, then. A grappling hook. Reel them in close so he can clobber them. Mobility won't be an issue once he learns Rokushiki. If he can learn Rokushiki." Clank, clank. Step by ponderous step, Kirishima approached the wall yet again. The Sharpie slammed clumsily into the wall, and it twisted in his grip. Panic flashed across his face as the Sharpie hung precariously at the edge of his fingertips, delicately balanced against the wall. Sweat ran in rivers down his face as he gently eased the marker back into his grip. Mei checked the time. "You should have done this on the weekend. Kirishima is going to be out of it tomorrow." Izuku shook his head. "I tried, but Aizawa wouldn't let me come in without Recovery Girl on site. He says it's usually never allowed, but Nezu made an exception for me." "Do you think Nezu knows what you're doing?" "I never told him, but I suppose he's smart enough to figure it out." As the faintest hints of dawn reddened the eastern horizon, Kirishima, face haggard, hair hanging limply over his eyes, arms and legs too tired to tremble beneath their burdens, shuffled towards the wall for the 100th time. Halfway there, He tried to reach for his chest, and he sank to one knee. It hurts, Kirishima groaned. Hard, I think I. One more step, Izuku roared. Get up. Just one more. But are you going to be a hero or not? Kirishima sat there gasping for breath. To Izuku, it seemed as though his words fell on deaf ears. Then a fire lit itself in Kirishima's eyes. Slowly, bones creaking from the effort, Kirishima rose back to his feet. With Herculean effort, he raised his right foot a millimeter off the ground. It slid across the pitted wooden floor, settled half a foot forward, and took his weight. Kirishima grunted in pain. Before him, the far wall stood tantalizingly close, its tally marks a tangle of wriggling lines dancing in his blurry vision. His arm rose, and his leg shuffled forward for one final step. The marker slipped from his fingers. Kirishima didn't seem to realize it, still moving forward. His foot slid onto the Sharpie, and when he set his weight down, it slid out from under his feet. That sudden, tiny shift of his foot disturbed the delicate balance of weight keeping Kirishima's body upright. The weights twisted his leg awkwardly. An ordinary limb would have handled the strain with the barest twinge of protest. But bones pushed as far as Kirishima's had been, riddled with minuscule cracks and held together through sheer force of will, started to fracture. Izuku felt a shiver of premonition run down his spine. In that instant, he knew Kirishima was a second away from having hamburger for legs. Acting on pure impulse, Izuku lashed out with his lightning. A razor wire of electrons darted through the metal weights, cleaving them in 3 pieces. The shorn metal hit the floor in a shower of clanking metal. Kirishima collapsed, writhing on the floor as every muscle in his body spasmed painfully. Izuku rushed over, frantically searching for any way to help him. He thought about numbing his muscles by temporarily paralyzing the nerves, and instantly dismissed the idea. One wrong move, and he could stop his heart. Izuku, Mei snapped. You need to take him to the nurse. But Izuku let out a deep breath. All right. He carefully cradled Kirishima in his arms and sprinted away. Recovery Girl's door was already open, and she had a bed and a sour look of disappointment waiting for him. Nezu filled me in, she said sharply as she splinted Kirishima's legs and forced a painkiller down his throat. And you better believe if I was in charge of this school, you would be off to general studies until you got your head screwed on straight. Got it? Izuku gulped and nodded. Recovery Girl sighed and said, It is my understanding that you at least intervened and prevented him from suffering any serious injuries. If you hadn't, well, with him as exhausted as he is, I can't use my quirk on him. Shattered bones while in this state could have ended his career before it even started. So, Izuku, don't do this again. I won't. Good. Now go home and get some sleep. Can I come see him tomorrow? Izuku asked. To make sure he's all right? The nurse's stern expression softened a bit. You may, and you better have an apology ready. I'm sorry, Recovery Girl smacked his arm with her cane. For him, Midoriya. Now go home, before I have you join your friend in the other bed. As early as it was in the morning, Izuku felt none of the fatigue that should have come with lifting weights all night. He felt a restless electric hum in his head as he worried over whether or not it worked. He wanted to believe. Kirishima had worked as hard as he did, reached the very edge of his exhaustion. So what if he stumbled on the last step? Didn't all that effort mean something? Yet, Izuku couldn't dismiss that lone, niggling doubt that the last step was the most important, that Kirishima had failed a test of character that separated ordinary men from monsters like him. Kirishima had woken up when Izuku finally worked up the nerve to visit him at UA. His arms were bundled in casts, and he had an Roman 4 jutting out of his arm. Recovery Girl watched with a wary eye while Mei tinkered with a mechanical arm holding a spoon. It did a fine job scooping up kanji, but it had a habit of aiming for Kirishima's eyes instead of his mouth. Hey, Izuku said awkwardly. How do you feel? Kirishima grunted and sat up. Like every muscle in my body got pounded into hamburger, dude. I can literally feel my heart pumping blood through my body with how it hurts. Izuku gritted his teeth. He wanted to believe that Kirishima would be right as rain with some more food in him. But seeing him with sunken eyes and shaking arms, feebly clutching to the blankets, he knew it hadn't worked. I'm sorry. I don't know why it didn't work. It didn't work because it's plain crazy, Recovery Girl snapped. Exercise isn't magic. It's like setting an oven at 4,000 degrees Celsius and expecting your cookies done in half a minute. All you wind up with is charcoal. Developing muscle mass takes time, patience, and caution. Overdoing it, like you had Kirishima do, damages the muscles and weakens them in the long term. Izuku gulped. Is he? He will be fine. Perhaps not completely right as rain for the sports festival, but I'll do my best. But he will be missing out on a few days of class. And I think it's only fair that you take notes for him. Izuku nodded. Is there anything else I can do? Unless you have some miracle cure stashed away. No. When Izuku started thinking about it, Recovery Girl glared at him and said, That was not an invitation to try another harebrained scheme of yours. Give him so much as a sliver of an aspirin tablet without consulting me, and I will have you scrub this entire campus top to bottom until I can see my reflection in every surface. You hear me? I understand, but I might have an idea. Denied. Midoriya, you have helped quite enough. As the primary care physician for all students of this school, I cannot allow any treatment plan that lacks the approval of the National Medical Board. Looking up at the ceiling, she said loudly, even if Nezu asked me to. You know, Kirishima said, I kinda want to hear what he. Listening to his ideas got you into that bed. Midoriya acted with the best of intentions, or so I believe. But that doesn't change the results. I hope this teaches you to think a little more critically of other people's ideas, right? Kirishima nodded and settled back into bed. Once she got him another dose of painkiller, she ushered Midoriya out of the room and tapped his shoulder when he turned to leave. People have limits, Midoriya, and pushing past them has long-term consequences. You could have killed Kirishima. Please don't do it again. With those final words of wisdom, Recovery Girl went back into the room. Mei stepped past her and walked with Izuku out of the school. Never thought I'd be on this side of a bad idea, she mused. Me either, Izuku groused. I don't get it. Why did it work for me? Different world, different rule, I guess. Seashells spit fire and fruits give quirks. We could always try taking someone else there. They walked on in silence. As they crossed the threshold of UA's campus, Mei asked, Feel like testing out some of my new babies? Izuku disappeared in a flash of lightning. Mei's eyes darted about, catching the stray sparks in the air that marked his path. With a sigh, she said, Guess he's done the same for me enough times. The trail of sparks led her down to the Musutafu beach. It came as a shock to see the glittering sand, and a few people even had towels laid out, though the odd patch of rusted metal amidst the waves warned anyone against swimming. Part of her mourned her old stomping ground for old motors and scrap metal. But she had to admit, the beach looked and smelled a lot nicer. Izuku sat in a divot of displaced sand, knees pressed against his chest as he stared out at the waves. Mei sat down next to him and said, You cleaned this up, didn't you? Izuku didn't answer, but his silence confirmed it. Nice going. Now where am I supposed to get new parts? I could have killed him. I could have killed you 100 times over. That one piece of baby 29 is still embedded in the wall, with a bit of your hair poking out from underneath it. Izuku fell quiet as he struggled to find an answer. The waves lapped closer to their feet as the tide rolled in, yet Izuku refused to move. Everything feels so fragile here. If I'm not careful, I could rip a door off its hinges, crush a pencil into splinters, walk clean through a glass window, shatter the ground beneath my feet. I cut my phone screen with my fingernail the other night, and fried my all-night lamp when I tried to power it myself. He grabbed a handful of sand and squeezed it until he could hear the crackle of quartz grains cracking. Even the people are fragile. Who am I going to hurt next? Another classmate. My mom? You? May took his hand. Don't forget, I went there too. I'm not as fragile as I used to be. My dad nearly jumped out of his skin when I lifted a car with one hand to check the transmission. Izuku squeezed her hand. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to show her he could if he tried. You are stronger, but I am something else. Recovery Girl said that people have limits, but me? What are my limits? Every day, I can lift more and more weight. I can move faster, hit harder, and take harder hits. None of my classmates can keep up with me. I'm not even sure the teachers can. How long will it be before I'm stronger than All Might? What if I already am? Izuku opened his hand. Fine powder drifted from his fingers and disappeared into the beach. If I don't have any limits, then there's no limit to the amount of damage I can do. That also means there's no limit to the amount of good that you can do. You could power the whole city, or pull every person out of a burning building before it collapses. If you're worried about doing good, then pick a problem and do something about it. And what if that problem is everyone is afraid of me? May shrugged. Not much you can do about that besides prove them wrong. So, how are you going to do that? For a while, Izuku stared out at the horizon. Then he said, I'll win the sports festival. And I'll do it without hurting a single person. Not a scratch or bruise on them. All right? Then what? Then the internship. I'll pick whoever I can that's in the spotlight, taking down villains. He grinned and said, I'll show them exactly how good of a hero I am.